Mace Windu strode across the balcony high above the roaring crowd in the Geonosis arena, carefully measuring each step as he approached Count Dooku. The stench of dust and the acrid tang of blaster fire filled the air. Below, columns of spectators cheered in anticipation of bloodshed, but Mace Windu remained unmoved by their savage fervor. From his vantage point, he surveyed the chain of events unfolding in the arena. Scores of Jedi were scattered across the sandy floor, maneuvering among towering beasts and throngs of battle droids, doing their best to protect one another and rescue Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Padme Amidala from certain doom. Mace had arranged this dramatic entrance to catch Dooku off guard, but the Count did not seem surprised to see him. Instead, the fallen Jedi Master regarded Mace with a small, knowing smile. Dooku's voice was smooth but tinged with an undercurrent of danger as he greeted the Corran Master. "Master Windu," he said, inclining his head with an air of condescension. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." Mace's grip tightened around the hilt of his lightsaber. He could feel the swirl of the Force, the energies of life and death dancing in the massive Colosseum below. "This party's over," Mace declared, igniting the violet blade that cast a brilliant glow against the Count's face. He allowed the tension of the moment to linger, every muscle in his body coiled. Just then, a blur of motion pulled Mace's attention to the side. Jango Fett, armed to the teeth, had taken aim at Mace's head. The bounty hunter's blaster pistol tracked him with lethal intent. But Mace Windu was poised. With a deflection of perfect timing, he angled his lightsaber and redirected the blaster bolt. Jango fired again, and once more, Mace's reflexes proved superior. The second bolt ricocheted, striking the stands and sending spectators scattering in alarm. Meanwhile, Dooku lifted a hand to signal his new allies, the Geonosians and the battle droids under his command. The arena erupted in fresh chaos as lines of droids marched in formation. All around, Jedi ignited their sabers. The next step would be a swirling collision of Force user against mechanical soldier, a war that would determine the fate of the Republic. Yet Mace, for all the tension of that moment, could not shake a subtle, uneasy chill in the Force. And then he heard the distant engines. The Republic gunships had arrived. In a vast thunder of repulsor lifts, they descended from high above the arena. At first, Mace felt a measure of relief to see them, for they carried legions of clone troopers that the Jedi had commissioned only recently on Kamino. These reinforcements, so vital in strength, made the Jedi confident that they could match the Separatist army. Mace even caught a glimpse of Master Yoda among the swirling dust. But what he did not know, what he could not have guessed at that moment, was that a hidden directive lay dormant within each clone's mind. That day, on the scorching sands of Geonosis, Emperor Palpatine's grand design would pivot unexpectedly. In the turmoil, Mace leapt from the balcony and descended like a bolt of purple fire. The ground rushed up to greet him, and he landed deftly between Jango Fett and the captive Jedi in the center of the arena. Chaos reigned. Reek, Nexu, and Acklay rampaged in the background. The crowd's roars thundered in Mace's ears, but he centered himself with an inward focus on the Force. The two super battle droids advanced, unleashing salvos of scorching plasma. Mace slashed them down in arcs of amethyst brilliance. Jango rocketed forward on his jetpack, flipping in midair to fire a trio of missiles. They honed in on Mace, but with the speed of one who had mastered Vapad, a form that harnessed the raw, intense emotions of battle into disciplined skill. Mace twisted aside. Each projectile shattered against the ground or the stands, sending up sprays of stone shrapnel. Mace rushed forth, deflecting more blaster fire and rolling beneath the flaming wreckage of a fallen reek. When at last he saw an opening, he moved on Jango with lethal precision. The bounty hunter's bravado faded for a split second as the Jedi Master closed the distance, but Jango's skill was formidable. They exchanged a flurry of close-quarters blows, metal gauntlets and flame projectors clashing against the radiant sweep of Mace's lightsaber. Mace parried a wrist lance aimed at his throat and felt the heat of a flamethrower's gout wash uncomfortably close to his face. Then Jango fired a small missile from his gauntlet. Mace, assisted by the Force, angled the blast just to the side, but he was forced to step away from his stance, opening his left flank. He had an instant to realize Django intended to capitalize on it. However, Mace's perception of the force allowed him to sense the moment of aggression before it concluded. He pivoted, slicing horizontally. Violet light cleaved across metal armor, biting through. In a single heartbeat, Django Fett's headless body crumpled to the hot sand, the crowd screaming in sudden shock. Smoke and debris mingled in the sweltering air, and Mace took a moment to absorb the violent finality of his blow. He was not one to revel in the kill, only relieved that the threat had ended. But all around, there was no time to rest. The crisis demanded attention, for hundreds of Jedi were locked in lethal combat with countless battle droids. Geonosis' skies were thick with dust and shimmering heat. Republic gunships landed in the arena's center, dropping platoons of white-armored clone troopers. Their presence galvanized the morale of the cornered Jedi. Mace spotted Ki-Adi-Mundi leading a group near the southern gates, and Kit Fisto deflecting an onslaught of blaster fire. A trembling sense of unity settled over Mace. Though the Jedi were outnumbered, they had the Republic's new army at their side. Surely they could turn this grim confrontation into a swift victory. Then, without warning, an abrupt shift tore through the Force, like a black cord thrumming out of tune with all that was pure and alive. Mace felt it stab at his chest. He had experienced premonitions of darkness regarding the war and the clones, but never so suddenly, never so violently. It was as if a million small flames guttered in unison. He glanced up at the main balcony. In the swirling dust, Count Dooku stood with an eerie composure. Was Dooku behind this new ripple in the Force? There was something else, some intangible sense that the future had abruptly pivoted away from the path Mace had foreseen. Then the clone troopers turned. The moment was so subtle at first that it defied belief. Mace saw a squad of troopers pivot away from the droids they were engaging. In unison, they angled their blaster rifles at a group of Jedi Knights assisting injured comrades. A few troopers turned their weapons on a Jedi Master who was blocking super battle droid fire. Then Mace saw the bright red bursts, and it was like an icy blade stabbing through his mind. The clones were firing upon Jedi. All around him, white-armored figures that had been the Jedi's allies moments before shifted their aim with calm, methodical efficiency. Blasters that had been targeting B-1 droids or Geonosian warriors now unleashed blasts at Jedi defenders. Mace saw two knights fall in a hail of red bolts before they even realized what was happening. Another half-dozen Jedi scattered, deflecting desperately. A surge of confusion and horror spread through the Force. In that moment, Mace knew a fundamental betrayal had occurred, one that would reverberate across the galaxy. The clone troopers, bred to obey orders without question, had just received a command, a hidden directive. The command that Mace had only heard in rumor, never once suspecting it could be real, was now in full effect at the worst possible time. Order 66. Even as Mace struggled to catch his breath, the Force howled with sorrow. This was not meant to happen here, not like this. The clones were the Republic's defenders, or so the Jedi had thought. Now the arena was a maelstrom of confusion. Separatist droids still hammered away, but the clones turned on the Jedi as well, effectively pitting both sides against the Jedi in the center. Mace's mind raced, fighting to reconcile this betrayal with the immediate need to survive. In seconds, the new reality crystallized. Mace dashed through a corridor of swirling sand, hearing the snap hiss of lightsabers as Jedi across the battlefield tried to defend themselves from an onslaught of traitorous troopers. His heart pounded with urgency. He could still sense Master Yoda's presence in the Force, a steady glow of ancient power, overshadowed now by heartbreak. Yoda must have realized, as Mace had, that the Jedi were in grave peril. Adrenaline surged through Mace as he deflected a barrage of blaster bolts from a squad of clones above him. He recognized their markings, the 212th Attack Battalion, under the leadership of Obi-Wan Kenobi. These clones had been so loyal only moments before, yet now their rifles belched red plasma, aimed straight at Mace's chest. He leapt to higher ground, channeling Vapad to keep each shot at bay. The Force guided him, coaxing him to make lightning-quick adjustments so that the lethal blast shot back at the troopers. Some fell, the rest took cover, their training demanding an efficient regroup. Mace soared over the heads of those troopers, flipping to land near Obi-Wan, who was locked in a brutal fight with droids and clones alike. "Kenobi!" Mace called. Obi-Wan blocked a blow from a super battle droid, severing its arm with a brilliant slash of blue light. His eyes darted to Mace, wide with alarm. "Master Windu," he called over the din. "The clones are attacking us. They've gone mad." "It's not madness," Mace replied grimly. "It's something worse." They had no time for explanations as another wave of troopers advanced. Combined droid and clone fire hammered their position. Mace deflected a stream of bolts, then hurled a wave of the Force to shove the droids back. Obi-Wan did the same to a group of clones, sending them sprawling. The two Jedi Masters realized they had to regroup with the survivors. They spotted Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon, and other Jedi forming a defensive perimeter near the center of the arena. The clones were unrelenting, their white armor shining in the sun, methodically pressing the offensive. The droids, lacking discernment, continued to target all enemies. The entire arena had descended into a chaotic free-for-all that spelled near-certain doom for the Jedi if they stayed pinned here. Mace and Obi-Wan forced their way toward the center. "Watch your flank," Obi-Wan shouted. Mace whirled, intercepting a volley from yet another cluster of clones. Their movements were precise, mechanical, and heartbreakingly devoid of any sense of camaraderie. Mace could almost sense the absence of free will in them. Whatever had been placed in their genetic code or training was commanding them to kill the Jedi without hesitation. In the center, around 24 Jedi had formed a circle back-to-back, lightsabers raised to deflect the incoming storm. Mace recognized Kit Fisto among them, his green blade flashing. The Nautolan Master glimpsed Mace and Obi-Wan as they drew close. "Master Windu," he called. "What's happening? The troopers have turned on us." "I don't—" "Order 66, Mace replied breathlessly. "It's some sort of directive they're compelled to follow. They've been ordered to destroy us all. We must get out of here." Before more could be said, an entire regiment of clones marched into formation near the north side. Missile launchers were hefted. The bristling threat of heavy ordnance darkened the horizon. Meanwhile, hundreds of additional battle droids advanced to the south. The Jedi were surrounded. Off in the distance, Mace glimpsed Count Dooku. Even from this range, the former Jedi Master's amusement was palpable. He had evidently not anticipated such a sudden boon to his cause, but he was prepared to exploit it. Though the clones were not allied with him, he recognized that the Jedi were now pinned between two deadly forces. With a cruel twist of fate, the Jedi were locked in place, outnumbered. Yoda arrived in a low-hovering gunship. Somehow, the wise Grand Master had managed to take command of one of the vessels, or at least had subdued its pilot. The side doors opened, revealing Yoda, who beckoned for the surviving Jedi to board. "Quickly, we must. Leave now or lost all will be." In a single decisive motion, Mace shouted for the Jedi to move toward Yoda's gunship. A volley of rocket fire from the clones shrieked overhead. One rocket impacted the sand mere meters away, filling the air with choking dust. Screams punctuated the crackling gloom. Mace used the Force to shield himself from flying debris. Then he rushed forward, defending those Jedi who ran for the gunship's open bay. It was a haphazard, desperate evacuation. The clones realized the Jedi were attempting to escape, so their attacks intensified. A line of troopers aimed rocket launchers, and Mace shouted a warning. He jumped forward, blade humming, and deflected 2 rockets back at the troopers, forcing the rest to scatter. Another group of clones advanced with heavy blaster rifles, peppering the Jedi from behind. Anakin Skywalker, who had somehow regrouped with the other Jedi, raised a hand and unleashed a fierce telekinetic wave, knocking half of those troopers off their feet. Even in the swirling, life-and-death struggle, Mace noted Anakin's raw power. It flared like a white-hot star, and for a moment, a sense of dread tugged at Mace's heart. So much potential, so many ways it could still go wrong. Yet they had no time to dwell on it. Obi-Wan, battered and bruised, guided Padme to the gunship. She had joined the fray with unwavering courage, but the betrayal of the clones had shaken her profoundly. She looked at Mace with haunted eyes, as if pleading for an explanation. Mace could only shake his head. No words were enough to describe the betrayal. One by one, battered Jedi stumbled onto the gunship's ramp. Yoda, at the threshold, provided cover with his green saber, deflecting a hail of blaster fire. Mace flung out a hand, sending a wide arc of force energy that scattered a fresh wave of clones. "Go!" he shouted, urging Ki-Adi-Mundi and the others to get on board. Dooku, observing from his balcony, made no move to interfere. Perhaps he assumed that the Jedi were doomed to be destroyed by the clones eventually. Perhaps he was intrigued to see how things might play out. Mace spat dust from his mouth, his brow furrowed. He intended to survive no matter what Count Dooku believed. The Jedi needed answers, and quickly. At last, Mace and Obi-Wan dove onto the gunship's ramp. The pilot, partially disarmed but still forcibly at Yoda's command, took off at Yoda's order, lifting the gunship into the air. As they rose, a volley of missiles streaked skyward, trailing smoke. Mace braced himself against the ship's interior, nearly losing his footing as the pilot evaded. Explosions rocked the metal hull. A trembling whine echoed as the gunship's shields absorbed the brunt of the assault. The violent blasts faded behind them, and the exhausted cluster of Jedi slumped against the walls of the gunship. Bodies were battered, robes scorched, sabers flickering with partial damage. Mace glanced around, counting survivors. The group was painfully small. Kit Fisto, Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Luminara Unduli, Barriss Offee, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Shaak-Ti, a few others. Masters, knights, and Padawans alike looked dazed by shock and grief. Many had perished on the arena floor, fallen to droids or more hideously, to the sudden betrayal of the clones. Anakin pressed a gloved hand to his forehead, breathing heavily. Why would they turn on us like that?" he demanded, voice tinged with fury. "We were supposed to be on the same side." Yoda, seated on the floor to steady himself, closed his eyes. In their minds, a seed of treachery was planted. Order 66, it seems. A control mechanism, it is. Silence settled over the battered Jedi. Mace finally found his voice. "We suspected something in the clones, but we never imagined it would be so absolute. This must be the handiwork of Darth Sidious. He manipulated the creation of the clone army from the start." Obi-Wan's face darkened. "We have to warn the temple. If the clones have turned, then Coruscant itself could already be compromised." At the mention of Coruscant, a somber hush settled. That world, the galactic capital, was the heart of the Republic, the location of the Jedi Temple. Hundreds of Jedi lived there, meditated there, trained the next generation of Guardians there. If the clones turned on them, the temple could become a slaughterhouse. The gunship soared through Geonosis's dusty atmosphere, occasionally buffeted by flak from the remaining separatist forces. The pilot evidently aimed to leave the planet's orbit as soon as possible. Mace joined Yoda in the cockpit, leaning over the controls. "We need a clear path out of here," Mace said urgently, "and contact any other Jedi who are still alive." Yoda nodded, a deep sadness etched into his ancient features. "Once free of this battle, we must find a safe haven. Then, a new plan we must form." The pilot turned. "But the Republic fleet is engaged in orbit, Master. We're not guaranteed a safe corridor, especially with the clones receiving new instructions. They might regard us as traitors." Mace exchanged a glance with Yoda. Their eyes held the grim truth. The galaxy had just been turned upside down. The clones were no longer an ally. The Republic itself might be compromised, puppeteered by a Sith Lord. The Jedi were caught in a web of betrayal, forced to react. But Mace Windu was never one to fold under adversity. His jaw set in a determined line. "Then we fight our way out," he declared. "We have no choice." In orbit, Republic Star Destroyers, Venator-class vessels, newly minted for the war, were exchanging deadly barrages with separatist capital ships. Swarms of Vulture droids and Republic fighters clashed in chaotic dogfights. Mace, peering out the viewport, saw flashes of turbolasers lighting the vacuum. The battered gunship would be a fragile target among these monsters. As they broke through the atmosphere, communications came alive with frantic chatter. Mace heard clone command frequencies referencing Jedi treason and execution of Order 66. It was clear the clones across the entire galaxy were receiving the directive at once. Mace's stomach nodded. Every Jedi on Coruscant, on distant outposts on starships, was now at mortal risk. A near miss from a Vulture droid's laser cannons rattled the gunship. Yoda closed his eyes and reached out with the Force. The pilot, trembling, weaved through the swarm of enemy fighters. More clones, operating in concert with their new orders, were likely to open fire on any craft carrying Jedi. Indeed, a pair of ARC-170 starfighters in Republic colors veered in behind the gunship, locking on with aggressive intent.